Digital India Vision 8.0 in partnership with Google Workspace.
The other specific concern is with regard to the dilution of the Right to Information Act. In fact, Justice A.P. Shah also believed that Section 8IJ managed to create that balance between the right to information as well as the right to privacy, and there was really no need for any amendment. How do you respond to that?
No, look, I certainly don't want to get into a debate with a judge or a justice. That's a failed proposition from the very beginning. But let me just explain what we have done, and then people are entitled to the views. Right to information is not right to personal information. And the Right to Information Act that basically requires a public servant or those in public life to disclose what they have to disclose under the law is intact, it is untouched. But the right to information cannot mean, if I'm in public life or you're in public life, that somebody can query me on my blood group, what illness I have, what is my...
But that's surely not the intention or the concern.
Yeah, but that is the only amendment, that the right to personal data protection, the right to privacy is a fundamental right.
Yeah.
And the right to information cannot be used to infringe that. That's all.
But in the case of larger public interest.
No, in the larger public interest, that is the point I'm making, that the right to information is not touched. But those who try to conflate right to information as being right to personal information are the people who are going to have a problem. For example, if I'm a public servant and somebody wants to know my assets or whatever,
yeah,
or any indication of conflict of interest, that certainly doesn't mean that they have the right to know what my blood group is, or what my daughter's residential address is, or whatever. So that is the only amendment that has been done. Otherwise, the efficacy and all the rights under the Right to Information Act in terms of the accountability and disclosure of a public servant is intact. There's absolutely no change in that.
Okay. Let me then address future legislation. The Digital India Act. Do you have enough on your plate for now, or do you believe that you have the appetite to take on more? And when can we expect the consultation process and then possible legislation being moved?
No, look, I'll tell you, this is not so much about plate or not. The Honorable Prime Minister's vision is very clear. We have to get to $1 trillion digital economy by 26. We are at about 11% of total GDP is a digital economy today. We want to get to 20%. The digital side of our economy is growing at about 2.8 times the normal economy. Now, one of the enabling requirements that we have is good global standard legislation, a framework of laws that allows our innovation economy to grow unimpeded. And the IT Act, which is the principal legislation today, is 22 years old. So I think we can all agree today that in the world that we live in, a 22-year-old legislation is certainly, and that legislation does not even mention internet, is not necessarily the best thing for our young startups and our innovation economy. So we are working non-stop on that. I think sooner rather than later, and as early as this month, we will start the process. We will get a draft out. We have already done, for the first time in the history of India, pre-consultation of the legislation. So we have gone around the country and talked to the stakeholders and said, what do you want in a new legislation? And we've collected a lot of information, and we've designed a legislation, and we think we will have the first draft out for you to critique.
Can you give us some of the broad principles or broad pillars that you are going to be prioritizing as part of this?
No. Look, I mean, I can't. It's obviously a new modern bill, but it certainly will look at the internet comprehensively. It will look at the internet through the prism of the various types of intermediaries. In 2000, when we legislated the IT Act, the concept of an intermediary was anybody between the consumer and the internet. And today you know that the complexity and the diversity and the vast expanse of the internet leads you from AI intermediaries to e-commerce to all kinds of other. So we think there's a need to understand that and define that. We also want to address the issue of user harm. Safety and trust, openness, safety and trust, and accountability are the three principles for us in legislating and rule making. And we think on the user harm side, there is a need to really comprehensively define what the rights of our citizens are and what are the no-go areas for platforms.
Okay, let's address two of the current issues that have attracted a fair amount of attention, mind space and headlines. And I'll start by talking to you about the import restrictions that have come in for laptops. August 3rd is when the government decided to make that announcement, saying that there will be import restrictions that will come in. August 4th, you decided to extend that timeline to November. Now, industry is asking for at least another 6 to 12 months. Are we likely to see a further extension? And the larger issue there is, why the need for import restrictions? Is it not contrary to the government's own belief that there should be minimum government and maximum governance? Aren't we going back to the old ways of doing things?
Yeah, so let me be very clear. I think from the get-go, I think this was communicated incorrectly. This is not about import restrictions at all. This is not about licensing at all. This is really our attempt to create a framework of import management, to understand the sources from which we want to regulate essentially at a time when we are at an inflection point of the digital economy growing and the digital penetration of digital devices in India really ramping up and growing rapidly. We want to be extremely careful about the sources of the devices. So this is really an import management framework.
Okay.
We want to be very careful about what is the hardware coming, where is it coming from. We want to be clear that we want more and more trusted hardware in our digital economy, whether it's a server, whether it's a cloud, whether it's a laptop. And the cloudification is now expanding so rapidly that we think that India is going to be one of the largest procurers of data center servers. And so in keeping all that in mind, we want to create a framework where what comes into the country or what is deployed in our ecosystem is really trusted products. And so therefore, this is actually an import management system. And of course, in the process, we want to encourage more and more of the server brands and the server companies and the laptop and device companies to manufacture in India. And if not manufacture in India, at least go to a trusted place where they manufacture it, which is comfortable to us. So I think this is more of an import management framework. And we will certainly in the coming months, we are engaged. I have met with the industry, and there was obviously a lot of, I accept that because of the way we maybe did not communicate it, or we communicated it incorrectly, there was a lot of unease in the industry, and I quickly met them the next day and explained to them what our intentions are, and that we will take these intervening period of 90 days or 60 days, as the case may be, to try and do something that achieves government's goals, government's policy objectives of more domestic manufacture, more trusted products in the domestic ecosystem, as well as their own goods to have their supply chains not being disrupted.
So are you sympathetic to industry's demands, and are we likely to see November be extended even further?
Like I said, today let's not do any breaking news type of question and answer. We will see if that is required.
That's
what
journalists live for.
Yeah, I know, and that's my job to keep pushing back on that. Look, if you want to know our genetic makeup or our DNA is, we will certainly not do anything without the industry, without consulting the industry, and we certainly don't want to do anything that is disruptive. If we want to transition to a new framework of more trusted products, more domestically manufactured products because they are more trusted, we will do so in an orderly manner. And with the industry on board.
One is the aspect of being a trusted source, and you believe that this is linked to that aspect. But the other is the domestic production that you spoke of. Now, we've got the second version of the hardware PLI scheme. In fact, the deadline for this version ends after this current extension at the end of August. How much of this import management is actually linked to getting people to come into the PLI net, because it hasn't found many takers so far?
Look, I don't necessarily disagree with the characterization that the two are linked, and I think that's a fair misunderstanding to have. And I said it's a fair misunderstanding. Is it a fair
misunderstanding or a fair understanding?
I said it's a fair misunderstanding to have, and that is why I said this is about us making some mistakes in communicating it. This is not some Hathoda way of making people manufacture in India. I can assure you that. And that is why I have taken some pain to explain that our larger goal is to ensure that at a time when India's digitization is really accelerating, that the component, the systems that are now deployed in India are really trusted. We certainly don't want to be in the situation where countries like in the West find themselves having already invested and then having to wind back what they've already invested in and saying, no, these networks or these systems are not trusted anymore. And please understand, the other important trend here is, even on the core IP networks, the 5G, 6G networks, the composition or the intensity of IT and hardware systems are going to go up with the virtualization of these networks and Open RAN and all these. So this is the right time to create an import management framework, create incentives for domestic manufacture, but certainly be able to regulate sources where the imports come from.
CNBC-TV18 Digital India Vision 8.0 in partnership with Google Workspace.